City builders have been around for a long time. The original SimCity released back in 1989. The genre has a dedicated fanbase that remains to this day, with games like Cities Skylines keeping the spirit of SimCity alive. You're usually in charge of building and maintaining a city that grows as you play. The mechanics of each game vary, with some focusing heavily on infrastructure and economy, whereas others provide more casual experiences. While some city builders provide scenarios to complete, most city builders feature an open-ended sandbox mode. In this mode, you build up your city from scratch, and there's rarely an end goal. There's a great deal of satisfaction that comes from building a city over the course of tens or even hundreds of hours. As with any well-established genre, there are games that buck the trend and do things a little bit differently. Against the Storm is a roguelike city builder that deviates so far from the core idea that I hesitate to even call it the same genre. In Against the Storm, you take on the role of a viceroy tasked with building outposts to gather resources for the city. You build several outposts as you explore the world map looking for resources. Then, the storm rolls in and the whole world resets. All your outposts are gone. The resources you collected can be used to upgrade the city, giving you permanent bonuses, but otherwise, you're starting from scratch. Despite being in early access, Against the Storm feels incredibly polished. The art style is both unique and gorgeous. The music is great, and none of the game mechanics feel unfinished. That's not to say the game isn't evolving. It gets bi-weekly updates and has a roadmap with a ton of big features still to come. What really interests me about Against the Storm though is how it deviates from the norm. Each mission takes 1 to 2 hours max, less if you fail. After that you're done with the city. It just becomes a name on a map. A city builder where you play a whole city start to finish in 2 hours gives it a completely different feel to a game like SimCity. It almost feels like playing the beginning part of a city builder over and over. You're constantly trying to stabilise your settlement. If you do eventually stabilise, you'll easily complete the mission and your city is done. If you fail, well, you can just try again next time. If you succeed in building your settlement, you'll come back with some experience and resources which can be used to unlock new buildings and mechanics. You'll also expand your vision of the map, giving you access to new areas with more resources. This metagame progression helps to give the game some meaning and keeps you invested. My only complaint is that you get next to nothing if you fail. Getting less rewards does make sense, but the progression feels slow at the start when you're still learning the game. Thankfully, it does speed up once you start winning more, and you're quickly given interesting choices of where to spend your resources. Now you might be thinking that constantly rebuilding your city would get repetitive. It could easily feel like you were putting in all of the effort of starting a new city, but never getting the reward of seeing it grow and develop. Thankfully, Against the Storm avoids these problems. It's full of mechanics to make every run feel unique and interesting. The game nails the feeling of every run being different from the last. Each map has a biome which alters how you'll play the game. The forest biome is vanilla. In this biome, you're mostly focusing on the core game mechanics and you can ignore most of the local effects. This biome provides a good base to learn the game, without worrying about other factors. Some biomes slightly alter the gameplay, like the coral forest, where you get a variety of resources from trees, allowing for more varied production options. My favourite biome is the Scarlet Orchard. In this biome there are archaeological digs you can find. These are multi-stage events which if you complete provide a ton of victory points. I like this biome because it provides another victory condition that's entirely optional. You can choose to focus primarily on the archaeological digs and get a completely different experience to any other biome, or you can instead use them for quick resources and play a more vanilla game. Alongside the biomes, there are also modifiers. When you find a resource on the world map, to collect it you need to build a city next to it, and that city will be affected by a modifier. These vary a lot. Some of them are barely noticeable, and some of them make the runs significantly harder. In my opinion, the best modifiers are the ones that make you play slightly differently to account for them. For example, at the centre of your base you have a building called a hearth, which provides an area where you can build housing and leisure buildings. Usually this area is quite wide, but with the frosts modifier it becomes significantly smaller. This forces you to either think more about your base layout, or to build more hearths than you normally would. Either way, the modifier is causing you to make decisions which slightly alter the gameplay. There's also an element of randomness to the game, as what buildings and perks you're offered are chosen randomly from a pool. This means that you never know quite what your strategy will be, and you have to adapt on the fly to what you're offered. Through the progression system, you'll be regularly unlocking new perks and buildings to add to this pool, further diversifying the game. Against the Storm also has a comprehensive difficulty system. Whenever you complete the highest difficulty available, you'll unlock a new one with an extra penalty added. This is a tried and true system that many roguelikes use to add replayability, and it works equally well here. If you want a challenge, you can pick one of the prestige difficulties. If you want a more relaxed game, you can pick a lower difficulty instead. Against the Storm makes building cities from scratch over and over varied and interesting. On its own that creates fun gameplay, but there's several other benefits the game sees from this system. It allows the game to have complex mechanics without them being overwhelming. Each city is probably not going to explore every mechanic deeply, so you can learn about a mechanic by focusing on it in a single city. The quick feedback loop also lets you learn from your mistakes quicker. Whereas in other city builders it can take many hours of gameplay to see the consequences of your choices, in Against the Storm you get to see them almost immediately. This makes trying out new strategies fun, while also speeding up the learning curve. On the note of new strategies, there are many viable ways to play the game. You can focus on missions, trading, making your villagers happy, or exploration, just to name a few. All of these strategies have their merits, and you don't need to focus solely on one to win. Since there are so many sources of victory points, there are many viable ways to build your city. This lets you experiment with different playstyles without feeling like you're hindering yourself. The biggest benefit of this choice for me, however, is that it lets you play a single satisfying play session. These days, it's quite rare for me to be able to sit down regularly for long periods of time to get through a game. Often this means that with longer games, I struggle to get the chance to fully immerse myself in the experience. In Against the Storm, you're able to play a city start to finish in 1 or 2 sessions, which allows you to commit a smaller amount of time but still have a satisfying experience. Despite being a city builder, Against the Storm scratches a different itch to most games in the genre. As a result, it likely appeals to a different set of people to a more traditional game. If you really like building big cities that you work on over hundreds of hours, this game isn't going to provide you with that. What it does do is provide tense, strategic city building gameplay where every run feels distinct. If this video has gotten you interested in the game, I recommend you give it a try. A game this unique doesn't come along every day. And if this video has gotten you interested in seeing more of my content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.